And I heard you mention in another conversation that maybe psychotherapy could be viewed as a bit of prep work for the spiritual journey. What would you say if you had to narrow it down? What might be the prerequisites to embark on a spiritual journey?
Well, I think that if you have personal issues, then that can block a wider spiritual perception, because there are kind of no-go areas in your most immediate interiority that mean either you're consciously or less consciously preoccupied with those blocks, and so might try and use spirituality to bypass them or overcome them. Or alternatively, it may just be they're like blind spots, and so you can't engage with what the spiritual adepts tell us of wider reality. And so it's almost like psychotherapy can be the kind of groundwork for the beginnings of the spiritual journey. And in fact, this isn't actually a novel thing, because, for example, in the early Christian monastic period, becoming an aspirant or becoming a novice was largely about doing the personal work. And in fact, in the deserts of Egypt, the young monk or nun or equivalent would be told to perhaps go and practice some Stoic exercises for a year or two first, and then to sort of come back and begin the fuller Christian work. And whilst I don't think psychotherapy just stops at that point, I think it can then become very much a part of integrating the wider whole as well, because that takes its own effort and understanding and insight and so on. But nonetheless, it's something about doing the groundwork that then can really help the spiritual expansion.
It's really interesting, and you have, as you've mentioned already, a bit of a diverse background in interest. How would you say exploring different wisdom traditions, whether it be philosophical or spiritual, is a good use of time and might help your particular chosen path?
Well, I was greatly helped not just by psychotherapy, but also by the Buddhist practices that were coming into the West, particularly mindfulness. And I did a 3-year mindfulness training, so quite a sustained one, which was very helpful. It got me to relate to my inner self in a way that was complementary to the psychotherapy. It brought in practices as well as the habit of going to see an analyst, as I did. And that was useful. But for me, certainly Western Buddhism, or at least the secular appropriation of it, also had its limits, because it felt too much about me, myself, and I. And I realized, know much more about relating to the inner life of all things, not just my own inner life. And, whilst mindfulness will include loving kindness practices and so on, it didn't feel quite enough. And so then that led me to traditions from Advaita Vedanta, the non-dual side of Indian philosophy stroke spiritual practice. And there, the sense that all things were ultimately one when seen aright, and moreover that oneness was divine,